You usually don't know why something really works, but you really have a clear idea of what went wrong when things go wrong. I think that's the benefit that I have of being a little later in my career and starting being a first-time founder, is having seen all those pitfalls so I can avoid them.
You're listening to Customer Growth Sessions, presented by Intergrowth, where we talk through strategies to help up-and-coming e-commerce businesses bring in more customers. I'm your host, Pat Ahern. Let's jump in.
All right, listeners, welcome back to the latest episode of Customer Growth Sessions. Today, I'm thrilled to have on Corey Maynard, the CEO and founder over at Backer. Corey, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Excited to have you on today. You start out by giving us an overview. What is Backer?
Yeah, thanks. So Backer is a brand new startup company that makes high-end performance apparel specifically targeted at fan gear. Most of our products are outerwear. We have a few headwear products also, but the basic idea is trying to elevate the quality and performance of fan gear.
I love it. I love it. And one of the things that struck me that was so cool is when I checked out your site for the first time, there's a handful of like these big name college sports logos that are on there. So I think that is such a huge part of what you do. Maybe could you tell us a little about how you ended up starting the company?
Yeah, thank you. I spent my career in the outdoor industry. I was head of marketing and product strategy for YETI Coolers and a number of other outdoor brands. Spent my time on the premium side of the outdoor space. I've also been a college sports fan for my whole life. I grew up in Eugene, Oregon, which is the home of the University of Oregon. I live in Austin, Texas now, which is where the Longhorns are based. So college sports has been an important part of my life, my whole life. And as a consumer of fan gear, it didn't match the quality standards that I've seen in the outdoor space. Spending so much time in the outdoor industry, I'm very familiar with all the brands that make the premium apparel in the hunting and skiing and fishing markets. But fan gear wasn't using any of the materials or any of the processes that are used to make those kinds of performance products in the outdoor space. And so, I was having coffee with a friend and going through, I had a whole list of business ideas of things that I'd been chewing on for a while that I'd fleshed out a little bit. And he had worked in the apparel space previously, and he specifically worked for a hunting apparel brand called Sitka Gear, which basically did to the hunting space what we're trying to do to the fan gear space. So the hunting market was filled with a lot of brands that were doing licensed camo patterns, but not really applying the kinds of materials that the ski industry, for instance, were using. And what Sitka did, which was revolutionary in that category, was use Gore-Tex materials to make hunting products. And it was a higher end product. It cost significantly more than most of the stuff that you would have seen in the hunting category at that time. But they found a niche of people that are willing to pay more for that performance because it's so connected to their passion. It's so connected to, and they're people who have to be in the outdoors a lot. When you're hunting, you're in the snow and cold and rain. And that's also what fans go through when you're standing in a stadium in the middle of a downpour or super heat wave or a snowstorm. In that kind of back and forth conversation where he's a sounding board for me about these things, I said, we can make a Sitka for fan gear. So that idea of let's apply that same model that the hunting space and fishing space have done, of taken gear that was really made for skiing and rock climbing and hardcore outdoor gear and apply it to fan gear and give that level of performance. And we both sort of stopped and said, is anybody doing that? And then I spend the next month, I've been trained in my career to identify business opportunities and gaps in the marketplace that have an opportunity. And specifically, I spent a lot of time thinking about what are categories that are underserved at the premium end of the segment. So I spent the next month doing as much research as I possibly could on the category. There's loads of great outdoor brands. There's loads of good athletic apparel brands, but those two worlds didn't really cross over. And for example, Ohio State is one of our partners. When I looked at their team shop online, there were 423 different men's jackets on that website, and not one of them was waterproof. So it was clear that there was a gap in the marketplace. And then, so that led to starting to build a business plan and starting to reach out to my friends that I've known for my 20 plus years in marketing and product and ask them if they'd be willing to start working with me on this idea. And I reached out to a lot of people that I trusted in the space to say, am I nuts getting into this world? And what are the things I need to watch out for? And how am I going to handle cash flow, knowing that we'd have to be paying for a product long before we could get a return on the cash? So spent the next few months flushing out that model and starting to work on a name, a logo, a brand identity, an idea for the brand, and then building a pitch deck, which I then floated around to friends and family to start a fundraising process and raised enough money to get the company off the ground, to do all the IP work we needed to do on the front end, to make sure that our names and marks were clear of issues. I think that's one of the benefits I've had of being so long in this space is that, and I've been, aside from being CMO type roles for a bunch of other companies, I've been a consultant for a ton of brands. And the biggest thing that you gain from a lot of experience in the category is seeing all the ways that companies make a mistake that they have to fix later down the road. You learn a lot more from the things that have gone wrong than the things that have gone right. You usually don't know why something really works, but you really have a clear idea of what went wrong when things go wrong. I think that's the benefit that I have of being a little later in my career and being a first-time founder, is having seen all those pitfalls so I can avoid them. So, I haven't worked for a company in a high growth space that at some point along their line didn't have a trademark issue that they had to deal with. Maybe they didn't think about categories that they wanted to expand into. Maybe they didn't get the clearances that they should have gotten the front end. And then when they became of size, it became a very costly thing for them to have to fix. So that's an example of something that we worked on from the front end to make sure that we weren't going to run into issues further down the road.
Within that, trademarks, in my experience, it can be like a couple $1,000 to apply for a trademark. Are there certain scenarios where you would say it doesn't make sense to get a trademark when you're launching a brand new brand?
Yeah. So rules vary by geography here. The US has very different rules than they have in Europe, for instance, or Asia or other countries. So I think having an understanding of the geography that you want to sell in from the beginning is really important on this. I've named hundreds of products and features and things like that, or been a part of naming that at various stages of my career. I'll just give a few pieces of advice and I'll circle back to put a fine point on your question there. One is that in going through the process, you need to come up with a lot of names and not fall in love with any of them. Like, that's the place where people get burned, is when there's a name that, oh, this is the perfect name. And then they realize further down the road that they can't use it. And they sort of talk themselves into, it's probably not going to be a problem. I'm so small. These people aren't going to care about me. And that might be true for a while, but if your company succeeds, like, at some point you will have to pay for doing that. And coming up with a lot of names, the low budget way to make sure that you are as clear as you can be. Number one is the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office has all of their database online that can be searched for free. So if there's a name that you have, you should definitely go type your name into that place and see what comes back. Trademarks are grouped by a class of goods. You need to look into your category. And so getting an understanding of how the trademark office would think about your category. And in the US, there's a couple different kinds of trademark protection that's offered. One is, so in the United States, if you have a name that you come up with that nobody else is using and you treat it like a trademark and you put a little TM after it, you start having those rights. You don't have to file or pay for anything beyond that. Now, if somebody else is already using that as a mark, you're going to get in trouble for it. Like, you do not have those rights if somebody else has prior use of your rights. Really, when you go through the process of paying for a trademark to be registered, what you're really doing is putting the rest of the world on notice that this is a mark that you own, and it's really to prevent people from coming into your space. And that's where you switch from having a TM to a Circle R. My advice would be like the absolute most important names for your business, the like name of your company, the name of your brand, things like that. You got to put in the time to make sure that you're clear. I would look in the patent and trademark office. I would do plenty of searches online, because anybody who's using your mark in your category has rights to it before you do. I mean, and like we literally went through more than a million, like literally more than a million names before we settled on something that we both liked and could clear, and probably had 20 names go through the full legal search process, which each one of those is not cheap to go through that search process. And almost all of them are too high of risk. You have to go through the process of doing a search for your name. You have to do a process. You have to get that clearance level, and then treat it like a trademark, if nothing else. So you don't necessarily have to start paying for the Circle R registration mark, but you need to use the TM and treat it like a trademark. And then if you want one more level of protection, that's where the Circle R comes in. I'm sure that aside is probably a bit boring for a lot of people, but I've spent a lot of time thinking about this particular issue.
Oh, definitely. That was brilliant. And the one other tidbit that I'll offer on that front as well, because totally agree. Coming up with a name it can be a really discouraging process, especially when you tie yourself to one name and you start like emotionally connecting to that name, envisioning the company with that name. And definitely do not buy a t-shirt with that name and that logo on it until you have secured that name. But one of the other tidbits that I'll offer on top of that, I really highly recommend doing just a general Google search for that name and other variants of that name, and look to see if there are other businesses, other organizations that have that name. Not that it'll necessarily impact you from a legal side of things, but what can come into play is, one, if someone else has the exact same name, very high likelihood you're not going to be able to get the .com variant, which a lot of people by default, when they're trying to find your brand, are either A, going to go to Google, or B, they're going to type in yourcompany.com and hope that it takes them to the right place. So you're going to lose out on a lot of potential visitors there. You also have the risk of people typing in your brand name and not being able to find your website, which is really not ideal. So that's just a little 2 cents I would offer on top of that.
Yeah, that's good advice.
But Corey, let's jump back to some of the other pitfalls you mentioned. You brought up trademarks. Yeah. What are some of the other big pitfalls you've seen in just past experiences that you were really mindful of with backer?
Part of it was I knew cash was going to be the absolute most important thing for this business. And that's not unique to our business, but it's especially true in the apparel space, because when you're dealing with colorways and size variations, like the number of SKUs that you have to carry to support a single line can get out of hand in a hurry. We were really conscious from the beginning about keeping our SKU count as tight as we could and not getting carried away with a lot of colorways and styles and small differentiation, because we were going to have to carry stock for all of those. And so, but man, I mean, cash is all of it. Cash is absolutely everything in the startup phase, because there's a period of time where there's a lot more money going out the door than coming in. And cash is the difference between aside from just paying your bills, it's the choice of, can we develop a new product? Can we spend money on marketing? And the thinking about how are we going to manage cash flow was absolutely an essential thing from the beginning.
Struggling to get new customers? We're here to help. Hey, this is Pat, the host of Customer Growth Sessions. Our agency, Intergrowth, has been helping e-commerce brands like Bella Bridesmaids, Brevity, and JS Dental to get more customers online since 2016. Interested in seeing how we'd help you? Head over to intergrowth.com/CGS to book a complimentary consultation with me. That's intergrowth.com/CGS. All right, back to the show.
And I'd say it's a lesson from my past, but less than a pitfall, is as a startup company that doesn't have bottomless funding, winning on cost is always going to be close to impossible. I mean, there's huge companies that have scale in your space, and winning on cost almost always requires scale. And so if you're not going to win on cost, you have to be better at something. And our entire mission from the beginning was, let's start by making the best possible product that we are capable of making, like using the absolute best materials that we can make. Let's design this as perfectly as we possibly can and not let cost be a driving factor in the decisions that we make, and then charge the margin that we need to be a successful business in the long term and be okay with it being a higher price point. And that's a scary space for a lot of brands. I think the experience that I had at YETI taught me that if you get the product right, consumers are going to be willing to pay for it. At least there's enough consumers that are willing to pay for it that you can sustain a business. And really, the higher end of, especially in the consumer product world, the higher end of the market is where all the margin lives. Is the companies that are winning on cost are winning on scale, because they can drive incredible volume, and so they can afford to operate off of thin margins. If you want to have money for marketing and product development and all of those things, you have to live in a space that you're making a better quality product that you're willing to charge for, or that you're offering a service that's differentiated from the market. And getting caught in between these things where you're trying to tell people a value proposition that costs a little more than these, but not as much as those, is just a really hard story to tell. And you're better off just making the best thing that you can.
And that, in my experience, is one of the hardest things for early stage businesses, is having the comfort with their product. Or even if we, broaden it and talk about service businesses, same holds true. It's really hard to list yourself as the premium option, especially in the early days of the business. There's a lot of fear that says, oh, if I am 10%, 20% more expensive than the competition, everyone's just going to buy from the competition. But to your point, if you can nail that product, there is a market for people that are willing to pay a premium. And yeah, YETI is a perfect example. I have a YETI cooler backpack, and it certainly was not cheap, but damn, that thing is the best cooler that you will ever be able to buy with your money. So yeah, YETI is a great example to look to in that sense.
Yeah, exactly. And it can be a little bit of a scary space. And especially in the early going, it's kind of a slog, because you're an unknown brand. You're asking for more money from brands that people have heard of and in some cases love. And you're asking people to take a leap of faith with you without really knowing what you're all about. And especially if you're in a case like what we're trying to do, what YETI did, what a lot of brands are trying to do, you're offering a different value proposition than consumers have come to understand in the marketplace. And so it's a lot of, you're cutting a new trail. And that requires so much communication about why this thing is better. We've had lots of debate internally on how do we deal with the negative comments on social media about price. Like, hit it head on? Do we avoid those conversations and not talk about price? We've sort of towed a few different ways. And honestly, I don't know that we're settled on fully the answer that's going to be most successful for us in the long term. But at this point, we're leaning into telling the story as much as we can. And even when people have harsh things to say to us because the product costs more than they think it should, like taking the time to tell the story to them, is my basic perspective. There is, if somebody is scrolling through Facebook or Instagram and they saw a product that they thought looked great, and they click through to the site and they see it costs more than they can afford at the moment, or then they're frustrated because they sort of wanted that thing. They were interested in that thing. And now it's like outside of a reasonable price point. And that frustration within the world of comments on social media leads to people coming in and saying some pretty negative stuff. And so starting with a mindset that this is a person that took the time to check out the site and was frustrated by it. So let's meet them where they are and just talk to them about, here's why we think it's worth the money, but not look down on people who can't afford that product. And there's going to be a lot of people who might not be able to afford it today, but kind of look that in their head for an upcoming birthday or a Christmas present or some kind of special event. And we want to be that product that The way we talked about it, Yeti was affordable luxury. So it's a splurge, but it's still in the range where you're not going to have to finance your house to be able to afford something like that.
And along those lines, I love that term, affordable luxury. With those types of products that are a bit higher end, that maybe aren't necessarily like the most approachable price point for every single visitor, that is certainly where you can get an option like the buy now, pay later options. There's Klarna, there's Sezzle is one of the other big ones. So listeners, definitely give that some thought and cons to that approach. But if you are kind of in a similar space where you're struggling with pricing, you are getting negative sentiment from customers, Corey, you hit on a brilliant point. I think a lot of those people really love the product, really want it, and do get frustrated by the fact that they maybe say, oh, I can't afford this today. I'm just going to leave a rude comment on Facebook and kind of vent for a minute about it. But yeah, buy now, pay later can be a great alternative to look into to hopefully make it a little more attainable for some people.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Honestly, there's no downside to offering consumers more options about how to pay for their product. You can certainly get in a scenario where if you have too many product options, you can paralyze consumers in making the choice. But if you have more payment options available for the consumer, that's nothing but positive, in my opinion.
Definitely. Well, Corey, I want to shift gears a little bit here. This has been so helpful, but one of the things I've been so excited to talk to you a little about is how you managed to get permission from, let's timestamp this a little bit. We're at like very end of March 2025 right here. But as of right now, you and the team have gotten permission to use 4 different university logos, which I would imagine that has been a whole process in of itself. As of today, what universities do you have partnerships with at the moment?
Yeah, so we have licensing partnerships. So we're an official licensee of the University of Texas, University of Oregon, Ohio State, and the University of Georgia. All top schools and teams within their space. And they've all been great partners, and we're all a huge challenge to get through the licensing process with.
And within that, did you find that for these first 4 schools that the licensing process was, call it 80% the same, or is it radically different with every school that you work with?
Yeah, good question. There's 2 main brokering groups that do all the contracting for college licenses. And then there's a couple of schools that can't handle it themselves, like Ohio State. And in broad strokes, the processes are similar, but they each have quirks and nuances to them that make it so it's not a cookie cutter thing. The other thing is the licensing process was really built for brands that have a product that they're already selling that they're going to add a logo to. And so what that means is that you really can't start the formal part of the licensing process until you can submit a sample that reflects the quality of the finished good. Now, as a company that's making products specifically for fans, and at this point, all of our products that we're selling are licensed apparel products. We are going to be, in the fall, we're going to be offering some backer only branded products. But for now, it's just those 4 schools. I didn't have samples at a quality level that would reflect final production until I was basically at production. And the process of making any kind of apparel is first you commit to a huge amount of undyed fabric, and then it has to be dyed to match the colors that you're trying to hit. And then all the different parts are assembled and it comes together. I didn't have samples that could reflect production quality until long after I dyed all the fabric I was going to have for the first production run. And that was a bit of a white knuckle time period there where, if Texas, for instance, hadn't agreed to the line, I was going to be selling a lot of burnt orange jackets that were blank without a mark on them, which I was prepared to do. I believe the product itself would stand for itself on its own. That's part of the reason we're going to be offering backer only branded products. But I'm glad we got the licenses. That was a huge relief. And so, there's a process you go through where you work through the broker. So there's a broker and there's a person for each school that is the person that signs off on it. And then when you're a small player in these big categories, there's also most schools of one big company that is the owner of the rights to that particular category. And then all the rest of the licensees are really a sub-license underneath that master license. And so the way the process works in the end, like after you fill out all the documentation and get everything in, you submit, here's the products I would like to make through this portal online that goes to one of the two groups that is the first gatekeeper there. And then they give their thoughts on, do we think this is going to be additive to the line? Is it going to, they're not looking for somebody else to sell a t-shirt that they're already selling to somebody. It has to add to the revenue that the school is going to build from the licensing program. So they do that first evaluation of like, number one, have they gotten all the documentation in? Have they signed up for, all these schools have some kind of fair labor representation and group that you have to join to get into the licensing process? Have they filled out all the paperwork correctly? It's like applying for a college. Like you have to submit, here's the story of what I'm planning on doing with the brand. Here's how this brand is going to reflect well on the company. Here's what we're planning from a distribution perspective. Here's our marketing strategy. Here's our financial plan. Like you have to give a full pitch as to why you're a viable partner here. Then your submission goes to that master license holder, which in some ways could view you as competition. And they give their 2 cents on, what do we think about this? Do we think it's going to add to the line? And then those groups get together and put together a recommendation that goes to the person who's at the school, who then gives the final thumbs up, thumbs down of, do we want to give a license to these people? And then you have to submit the products and the packaging to get approved and all that stuff. But each of the schools had a little bit of a different process, and building a relationship with the person inside the school who is going to be the final decision maker was absolutely critical. And I pulled any favor or connection or anybody that I've met in my lifetime to try to work my way to the people that I needed to build that relationship with. There was one time when somebody had agreed to meet me for lunch and he just then wasn't there. And I just basically stalked out his office for a really long time until he showed up. And then the meeting was great and everything went on, but there was a lot of hustle involved in getting through those pieces. Now I'm finding there's more schools that we're going to be adding this fall. And now that we have these flagship schools as already part of the program, the next conversations are infinitely more simple than the first one. And honestly, once the first of the schools said yes in the first round, it made the rest of them much more willing to get on board, because these are prestigious schools that are precious about their brand. And so being able to point to them as they're already in made the rest of them go a lot smoother. And now the conversations are going very smoothly. And we're in production. We have samples we can send them. Here's the thing. It's going to look like this, but with your color and logo on it. And it's much simpler. But getting that first license from a top school is no small feat.
People ask me all the time, should I be using ChatGPT to create content for my site? So here's the thing. AI is great at quickly spitting out blog content. It's also great at pissing off your following. If you've spent years building your brand and follower base, why would you risk that all with AI-generated content? At Intergrowth, we work with companies that see their brand as an asset to get more customers through human-crafted articles that your customers look for online. We master your brand voice and work with your team to write the best articles on the internet that bring you customers on autopilot from search engines like Google. Interested in hearing more? Reach out to us at intergrowth.com/CGS to book a complimentary strategy session with our team.
Oh, I can imagine. And from the school's perspective, I get it. I'm sure that the schools are thinking about it and saying, oh, we don't want there to be like a random 18-year-old kid scribbling our logo on the back of a t-shirt and selling their pickup truck outside of the stadium. So doesn't make the process easy. As you said, once you get your foot in the door, it sounds like it's way more straightforward to get into schools too and beyond.
Yeah, and the reason why all those workers' rights groups are a requirement now, when about 20 years ago, there were a lot of protests about workers' rights, sweatshops in some of the factories in Asia, and a lot of those protests went straight to the schools. And so the pickets are outside of the schools. And so anything that this is true of any kind of licensed product. When your brand is on a product, people associate that with you. And so I don't fault any of these schools for being diligent about the licensing process. And honestly, there's times where it feels like the levels of bureaucracy are kind of the point. Like they add friction to the process to intentionally to dissuade people who aren't ready for the level of performance that they're going to have to deliver to be a good partner to the school. You can't get a college license on a whim. Like you have to work for it.
I'm sure, given that the process, as you said, varies a little bit for each school, might be a really weird question to ask, but I'm trying to picture in my mind, like, what's a good timeline to expect? So let's say that I'm launching, I feel like I'm always using the example of razor blades on the podcast. Let's say I'm launching a hat company. I'm going to become your competitor. I'm going to have a Ducks hat company that I start.
Yeah.
What might I expect in terms of how long it'll take from that first conversation until being able to sell products with the Ducks logo on it? Is that 3 months? Is it 6 months? Is it 3 years? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I will say, I think the number one lesson that I have learned and relearned on a daily basis in starting this company is that nobody works on my time frame. And nothing happens even remotely close to the speed that I want it to. And nobody cares about it as much as I do. And again, I'm a brand that no one has heard of. A brand new company, has no track record. And I am at the top of exactly 0 people's priority list. So the question of the expectation of how long it should take, the apparel design and development process is very predictable. You know, that's the benefit that we have for this particular business model is there's really good supply chains that have been built to make high-end ski gear, outdoor products, things like that. There's really good fabrics. That is a very predictable supply chain. There's great product designers who have made these products for a really long time that we were fortunate to find a great partner there. But as soon as it leaves the vicinity of your control and goes into like somebody else needing to approve something, all bets are off. And some of them went really fast because there was a person who saw it from the beginning, believed in it. They might have known my background and had a little faith that I could really do the things that I say to do. You know, I've had a lot of people vouch for me to these people who they do trust. And so, you know, there's one school that was on board from the first meeting that I had and then told the people who do all the paperwork, just get them through. And that one was simple. The flip side, there's people that, you know, I sent email after email to and got no response. I'd get a 1-line response that was cryptic or just told me to fill out the forms, just go to the website, sent back down the bureaucratic path. From the first conversations I had to when we signed our first deal was like close to a year. This next round's going a lot faster. I mean, but we had one product category with one of our partner schools that we already had a license for apparel. We didn't have the license for the outerwear. We had a license. We didn't have a license for the hats. That has to be added into your process. And it was over 3 months of not getting a response from anybody, really. And so this is where I've been practicing the art of gentle persistence, of trying to be present on a regular basis and not cross the threshold of being a pain in the butt. You want to be like enough of a nit that they don't just put you to the bottom of the inbox, but not so much that you're going to make them not want to work with you anymore, which is a really fine line. And I'm sure I crossed it at times. And you know, one of the things that I've found is when the direct approach doesn't work, now I'm going to try to triangulate myself to this person and who else do they know that we have in common that we can get to and ask them to come in. And, you know, sometimes I can find my way to somebody's boss and people don't really love having their boss tell them, hey, what's going on this thing that's sitting in your inbox. But I also know, you know, I've worked in the corporate world for a long time and I know what those inboxes look like. And there's a fire that they're putting out on a daily basis. and there's things that their boss is asking them to complete. And these people's jobs, the most important part of their job is to maintain and grow the base of business that they already have. And every little keychain and cell phone case company wants to work with them. And it just sort of blends into the white noise of the inbox. And so finding your way to work your way up in that is the challenge. And that's the job. And for a significant part of the time, my job, like the main part of my job, was trying to work my way to the people that I needed to be on board with what we were doing.
I want to keep this answer generalized so that we don't have one of your contacts, let's say at Oregon, reaching out and saying, Corey, what the hell? Why'd you give away my email? But for people that are maybe looking to go down this same line, that are saying, hey, I really want to do a licensing deal with University X.
Yeah.
Is there a certain job title or series of job titles that you'd recommend that they look for at maybe university number one that might be a good starting point for the conversation?
Yeah. I mean, all of these schools have all the people that handle licensing for them on their websites. They're all on LinkedIn also. I mean, it's the job title of the most senior person. The person who oversees this is usually director of licensing. It also might be like a director of brand management, something like that. It's all brand or licensing or things like that. They exist in different departments in different schools. In some cases, they exist within the marketing function of the university. And in some cases, they sit in the athletic department. Because for a lot of these schools, the athletic department is the place where consumers engage with their brand the most. And so it's people buying gear to go to a game or show their fandom or things like that. So for some of these schools, it sits within the athletic department, but they aren't hard to find who the person is. Now, getting them to respond is a different challenge.
So within this, for the first few schools, what has surprised you about this process of getting licensing deals? Maybe in terms of either things that moved way quicker than you expected or things that were way more challenging than you expected?
Each school has like one thing or maybe a couple things that they really, really care about. And figuring out what that thing is for each of the schools is really different and is part of the challenge. Like there's one school that is super, super diligent about anytime you refer to them or anytime you use their marks, like it has to be the version that has the registration mark on it. There's some schools that don't care about that as much. There's some schools that care a ton about getting their color exactly right. And the biggest part of the challenge is color matching. And if you can't color match, you're not going to get the license. There's some schools that are much less precious about their color. There are some schools that want to review and sign off on any piece of marketing that you create. If you want to do a post on social media, if you want to send out an email to your own list, if you want to do social media ads, they want to see it and they want to approve it in advance. And there's some that as long as you're staying within the bounds of the rights that you have, then you're free to operate. Because each of these schools, they're webs of partnerships, and each of these schools also has a group that handles all of their marketing rights. And so we cannot say we are an official partner of these schools. Like that's language that's reserved for sponsors of the team. We can say we're a licensee of these, we're an official licensee of the schools, but that's different from being an official partner. And we can't photograph our product being worn in front of a stadium or in front of a recognizable building on campus without becoming a sponsor of the school. We can't use the marks outside of our own showing our product without becoming an official licensee of the school. I mean, not an official licensee, without becoming an official partner of school, becoming a sponsor. That was the most eye-opening thing. Like I'd done licensed products at a number of the places that I worked before, but it was always just sort of a side business as a way to stoke a fan base for a product that we were already selling. But this is the first time where licensed product has been the core of the business for me. And there's a whole lot more like approvals and tape to have to navigate around. Like you're constrained a lot in what you can do. Like you're constrained in where you can sell the product. You're constrained in sales strategies that you can do. You're constrained in how you market the product. Like you definitely have some handcuffs on that if you're not doing licensed product, which I've come to realize that has to be the biggest reasons why the outdoor brands aren't doing what we're doing, is that if you're North Face or Patagonia or Arc'teryx or these great outdoor brands, like you don't want any part of having to navigate the web of approvals and licensing and the amount of headaches that go along with it. And I think that's the biggest reason that Fanatics has become the company that they have, is that they remove that headache for a lot of schools, a lot of brands, a lot of teams, and handle all the mess of licensed product and navigating all that. They just take that headache away from companies like Nike, for instance. And so they've added a ton of value by doing that. But that's the reason all of these things, like anything, and this is a good lesson for any entrepreneur, anything that as you're going through the process, anything that is really hard for you, and like the things that are most difficult for you to navigate are going to become your biggest competitive moats once you get through them. And so all the things that make the licensing process really hard are the things that are going to give us time to operate, to build our brand within this space. And so when you encounter friction, like it's hard in the moment to have that mindset, but I see those as an opportunity to build a competitive position that'll make it so the competition will have a harder time coming in and doing what you do.
And that's such a good way to look at it, because I can imagine there have been a lot of days when you've been going through this and saying, oh man, this is such a nightmare dealing with all this red tape. But to your point, the more red tape that you're dealing with, the more that you can get through, the less likely it is that other competitor down the road is going to make it through the process and truly become a threat to your business.
Yep, I agree.
Well, Corey, this has been amazing. We'll wrap up here in a minute, but last question for today.
Yeah.
I want to have you tell listeners where they can go to buy Backer gear.
Oh, yeah.
But you've shared a lot of wisdom today. Is there any final parting advice that you'd offer to listeners who are, maybe we'll keep it narrow and we'll say, listeners who are looking to do licensing deals with universities or just other, call it large institutions?
I think, it starts with, you have to do your homework, and you have to start with the perspective of, what am I bringing to them more than what do you want from them? And so how are you, like, if you go in to their fan shop and you see something they're doing and you think, man, I can do it better than that, you have to be more than just doing something better than what they're already doing. You have to show them how you are going to add value in total to the amount of licensed product that they're selling, and view all things through that lens of how you are additive to their licensed product program. And if you don't pass that test, like, getting that license is going to be really, really hard. So start by looking at it from the perspective of, what are you doing for them? How are you either solving a problem for them or bringing something that is in total going to add sales to their entire portfolio, not just replace somebody that's there now. How are you going to be additive to the portfolio and take all your conversations from that perspective?
Corey, this has been amazing. For listeners who want to buy Backer gear, where can they find you guys online?
Yeah, so we are at backer.com, BCKR. My wife likes to say that the vowels cost more, so we cut out the vowels. BCKR.com, backer.com. That's an entire different conversation of how we acquired the 4-letter URL for our name, which required hiring some people that track down and negotiate those rights for you. But we do have the 4-letter URL for our brand. So backer.com, buy all of your premium, high quality licensed apparel. gear.
Well, once again, listeners, this is Corey Maynard, the CEO and founder over at Backer. Corey, thank you for coming on today.
All right. Thanks, Pat.
Thanks for tuning in to Customer Growth Sessions. If you found it helpful, subscribe and give us a review. It helps us to grow the show. Looking for more SEO guidance on how to grow your business? Contact us at intergrowth.com/estimator or email me directly. You can reach me at pat@intergrowth.com. That's all for today. We'll see you again soon.